Hi there, Mrs. Vance again. This is Unit 10 Notes, Part 5, and this is about how the genes that we inherit are related to the chromosomes. And this is why it's important for us to understand about meiosis before we start talking about genetics. So, big thing is, again, Mendel didn't know about chromosomes, but we can see now that we do know about chromosomes and about DNA and about how things work, okay, we can see a lot of correlation between the rules that he came up with before, without knowing about this, and what we understand now about chromosomes. The law of segregation depends on the separation of homologous chromosomes in anaphase 1. The law of segregation is the one that says you either get one or the other allele from your parents. The law of independent assortment depends on the alternative orientation of chromosomes in metaphase 1, and that's the fact that the inheritance of one gene is not influenced by the inheritance of another. And so when we look at the dihybrid crosses, for instance, that are independent of each other, that's what we're talking about, independent assortment. So it's really important for us to understand now that we know about these things, we can relate that back to what Mendel discovered back in the 1860s without knowing about it. So here we have our F1 generation. Here's our our pea plant that has all yellow and round seeds, heterozygous for those two traits, okay? In metaphase 1 of meiosis, remember those tetrads line up together, and any combination of those can happen, okay? And then in anaphase 1, when the homologous chromosomes separate, you may end up with one that has both parent alleles and one or ones that are mixed up, okay? And then in meiosis 2, when you separate out those when you separate out the chromatids, you end up with this relationship between the different kinds of gametes that can be produced. And when fertilization occurs, then that's going to lead to our F2 generation with that 9:3 to 3:1 ratio when you cross two heterozygous parents for two traits. Okay? And so it all relates back to the chromosomes. Now, one thing that does happen sometimes is that you have the same genes on the same chromosome, because remember when we learned about chromosomes, chromosomes have multiple genes on them, okay? And so there were some scientists in the early 20th century that studied plants that didn't show this kind of ratio in their F2 generation, and what they discovered was there were some genes that they were looking at that were on the same chromosome. Okay, these are called linked genes. They're close together on the same chromosome, and they tend to be inherited together. Can they be inherited separately? Yes. Why? How can that happen? Because of something else we learned about in meiosis, and that was crossing over. And so you can use the crossing over to help you figure out how far apart they are. Okay, so they were looking at, I think these are also pea plants, and they were looking at the pollen, the shape of the pollen. And so they're looking at, maybe they weren't pea plants, some other kind of plants. So they had plants with purple flowers that had long pollen, and they had plants that were red that had round pollen. And so what they found when they crossed them, when they compared the pollen, their observed they expected to get a 9:3 to 3:1 ratio, like Mendel did with the different traits in the pea plants, okay? But what they found was something really different. Most of the offspring, the vast majority, were like the two parents. They had either had purple flowers and long pollen, or they had red flowers and round pollen. And there were a few that had the non-parental combinations, and so that can be used to figure out how far apart they are. So what they discovered, what they explained is that those genes can be linked together on the same chromosome. If they're inherited on the same chromosome, they have a tendency to be inherited together. Now, so you would, in that ratio, when you look back at this, okay, then you would expect to have a 3:1 ratio of the purple long with the red round. And that's about what they got, except there were some that were purple round and red long. Okay, and that's actually led to the discovery of crossing over. Crossing over between those homologous chromosomes can produce new combinations of alleles in the gametes. Okay, you can form recombinant gametes that have those traits recombined with each other. And the percentage of those recombinants is called the recombination frequency, and that can be used to predict how far apart the genes are on the chromosomes. And so here we have some crossing over that's occurring, and so we can have some gametes that are recombinant. The closer together the genes are, the less likely they are to cross over, to be mixed up by crossing over. The farther apart they are, the more likely they are to cross over. All right, so we can also talk about genes that are on specific chromosomes, and the ones that we look at most frequently for this are the sex chromosomes. And so we're talking about sex-linked traits or sex-linked genes. All right. Now, to understand about sex chromosomes, okay, many animals have a pair of sex chromosomes that are like X and Y that determine the sex. Okay, in mammals, males have an XY set of chromosomes. You see pictures here on the slide, and females have two X's. Okay, the Y chromosome in males has genes for the development of testes, and the absence of the Y allows the ovaries to develop from the same kind of tissue. So just so you know, that the gene for maleness, for producing the testes, is on the Y chromosome, but there are other genes on the X chromosome that don't have anything to do with gender. Okay, the X chromosome is much larger than the Y and has a lot more genes on it. All right, and so this just shows about the inheritance of how you get your sex chromosomes from your parents. Both parents, the mother can only produce an X allele, an X gamete, because she has two X chromosomes, whereas the father can produce either an X or a Y. And so the father is the one that determines the gender of the offspring. All right. Now, since there are two copies of the X chromosome, this is something different. Okay. In female mammals, one X chromosome in each body cell is actually turned off and highly compacted. It becomes inactive. It's called a bar body. Okay. And which X chromosome gets inactivated is just a matter of chance in the embryo. It happens at a relatively early stage in the development of the embryo when there are fewer than 100 cells in the embryo. And randomly, one X chromosome or the other is turned off. There's something about the X chromosome, and I'm going to assign another video that's actually a TED Ed video about the inheritance like this, that it helps explain some of that. I'm not going to leave that explanation to that video and just talk about the X inactivation and the result of it. So the cells that are descended from each of those embryonic cells will have the same copy turned off, and this is how you end up with something like a tortoiseshell cat. And if you think back to doing the meiosis case study on meiosis, this is how you end up with tortoiseshell or calico cats. The cat shown here is a tortoiseshell. Okay, it's a combination of black and orange fur, and then the calico cat is black and orange on white, like you see here. All right. So in the early in cats, the gene for coat color is carried on the X chromosome. Okay. And so the random turning off, or the random inactivation of the X chromosome in those different cells, some of them will have the chromosome with the black gene allele turned off, and others will have the chromosome with the orange allele turned off. And so that's how you end up with patches of orange and black fur, depending on which cell those particular cells descended from. And here you see a calico cat where you have the same kind of thing. There's just the patches of color are on a white background. All right. There are other kind of chromosomal arrangements in other kinds of animals. Grasshoppers and various insects like roaches have what's called an XO system. The O stands for the absence of a sex chromosome, and so actually the females have two X chromosomes and the males have only one X and not a partner on there, so they have different chromosome numbers. In certain types of fish and butterflies and birds, the sex chromosomes are called Z and W. Males are ZZ and females are ZW. It's just a different way that they're inherited. Some reptiles, I think, also have Z and W sex chromosomes. There are some organisms that don't even have sex chromosomes. In bees, the sex is determined by the chromosome number. Females are diploid, males are haploid. Okay, and so you end up with different chromosome numbers, and that determines whether you're male or female. In some animals, even the environmental temperature determines the sex. In reptiles, in certain kinds of reptiles like turtles, the temperature at which the eggs are incubated during a specific period of their development determines whether they're going to be a male or a female. I think there are also some fish that are affected by temperature as well. And so that's one thing that global climate change can definitely have an impact on the sex ratio. For instance, sea turtles, because since the oceans are warmer and since the environment is warmer, then that can influence the number of males and females relative to each other in their population, and that can definitely have an effect on their population numbers over time. Now, sex-linked genes are ones that are found on the sex chromosomes. And again, the X chromosome has a lot of genes that are unrelated to sex, and the Y chromosome doesn't have a whole lot of genes on it other than the ones that determine the development of the testes. And so we'll focus more on things that are X-linked than ones that are Y-linked. The inheritance of white eye color in the fruit fly illustrates X-linked recessive traits, and that's really how scientists first discovered sex-linked chromosomes, or sex linkage was in the study of fruit flies back in the early 20th century. So in fruit flies, eye color is on the X chromosome, and when they first discovered this, they found that actually more frequently the white eyes occurred in males than in females. Okay, so here we have a female that has red eyes and a male that had white eyes, and when they crossed them, they found that all the offspring had red eyes. When they crossed the F1s, they found that about a quarter of them had white eyes, but they were always males and not females, and so that led them to realize that was carried on the X chromosome. Okay. So if a male, whatever on the sex-linked traits, whatever chromosome is on the X will be expressed in males, regardless of whether it's dominant or recessive. Okay. Here we have a female that is heterozygous for eye color, a male that is white, and then you will get some white-eyed females when you have that particular kind of cross. There will be some problems with sex-linked. The big thing to remember in sex-linked, you always have to indicate what the genotype and phenotype ratios are for males and females separately. And so you always have the Y in the male to represent that one Y chromosome as opposed to the one X chromosome. There are various human disorders that are sex-linked, and they mostly affect males. They're mostly due to recessive alleles, and they're most common in males. Because the male, again, is going to receive that one X-linked recessive allele from his mother, he's going to have the disorder, but a female has to get the allele from both parents in order to be affected, so it's much more common in males than in females. There are various ones that are found in humans. Hemophilia, which is an inability of the blood to clot properly, is more common in males than females. Red-green color blindness, which is a malfunction of the light-sensitive cells in the eyes. And also Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which is a progressive weakening of the muscles and coordination. All three of those conditions are more common in males than in females. And of course, one of the more famous familial indications of one of these things was the presence of hemophilia in the bloodline of the Russian royal family. Tsarina Alexandra was a granddaughter of Queen Victoria, and there were others of Queen Victoria's children and grandchildren who had hemophilia as well. But Tsarina Alexandra carried that recessive allele on one of her X chromosomes. Her husband, Tsar Nicholas II, did not carry that, but when they had a son, Alexis, he did inherit that recessive allele from his mother. And so he did have hemophilia, whereas their daughters did not. Since they did not ever have children, they were killed before they were able to have children. We don't really know whether they were homozygous or heterozygous, but they did carry those alleles. And that ends the notes on the part about sex linked chromosomes.